Minimalists.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn.
And I'm Ryan Nicodemus, and together we are the Minimalists.
This episode today, we're going to talk about your dreams, Ryan.
My American dream.
We grew up poor.
Yeah.
So when I turned 18, I went out and got the American dream.
Yes.
Well, I started pursuing it because there was a lot of discontent when we were growing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
just a little bit.
And I started climbing the corporate ladder. I think I was 22 or 23 when you came aboard the same corporation.
Yep.
And we wanted to live our American dream together, sort of in parallel, right?
Yeah. You know, I didn't really know what the American dream was, but, you know, knowing about the template, it was so nice to have something to, like, shoot for. Like, oh, I just need to get a house. I need to be able to buy a new car.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I need to have, like, literally the picket fence.
Yeah.
I need to have these things. I need to acquire this stuff. And so today we're going to talk about the American dream. What's good about it.
Mm-hmm.
What's not so good about it. We're talking about freedom. We're talking about travel. Maybe give you a little introduction to minimalism for those of you who are new to the podcast. And yeah, we're going to talk about the un-American dream as well. And we're going to answer your questions with today's guest. Our good friend Colin Wright is here, whose podcast is called Let's Know Things, and it's available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Colin, I need you to stop being more handsome than me right now. He couldn't if he tried.
I think this is... Colin is the perfect guest to have here in studio because he's the person who... basically turned us on to minimalism in 2009, 2010.
I remember the video you sent me. I think he was in New Zealand at the time?
You might have been. So there was this point where Colin, you had left your sort of not corporate gig, but the equivalent of a corporate gig, right? You were living in Los Angeles, working 100+ hours a week, running a branding studio.
Branding studio, yeah. Very, very different time, and not the corporate side of things, but the entrepreneurial world has the similar pipeline where it's the work hard, play hard thing, and you're told that you're supposed to pursue very specific metrics of success.
Yeah, and in doing that, you realize you were following someone else's template in a way, sort of. A version of the American dream. And what's fascinating is you and your girlfriend at the time realized you wanted to go separate ways, but amicably, and actually really liked each other, but had different aspirations in life. And so you had something called a breakup party. And I remember reading about this and how radical this was, because in our culture, if you break up with someone, it's supposed to be one step below violent.
Right.
That's the expectation. We're supposed to yell at each other. We're supposed to be mad at each other. Things are thrown. Arguments are had. In fact, your breakup party was the initial inspiration behind Ryan's packing party.
Yes.
Because when you
well, he gave me the idea. I'm like, oh man, if you just put the party at the end of anything, you make it fun.
That's right.
And people want to hang out and have fun with you.
And you had an actual breakup party at midnight. You turned your Facebook status to like single. I remember reading about this.
It's very symbolic.
And I didn't want your life at all. Like I saw this thing that was really aspirational.
Take
because
it back.
you left this structure that you walked away from, but then you became this peripatetic writer where you traveled to a new country every 4 months, and where you went was voted on by the readers of your blog, exilelifestyle.com. And so you were in Iceland and New Zealand and India and South America and all these other places, and I hate traveling.
Right.
And you owned only 52 items, and I'm like, that sucks. I want to own a kitchen table.
Yes.
And
the kitchen table wouldn't fit in the bag.
No,
it doesn't go in the overhead bin very well.
No, they hate when you bring the
portable kitchen table. Patent pending.
Have you seen when you're at the airport and they're like, you can't bring these items on a plane, and it's like a weed whacker
and a kitchen table.
You know,
that
some
was
guy,
right?
some guy, probably Colin, tried to bring a weed whacker onto a plane as one of his 52 items.
You know, it's funny when you sent me that video of Colin, where he just kind of talked about your minimalist lifestyle. I just remember thinking like the same thing. I'm like, oh man, I don't want to like travel all the time, but I totally saw how you were able to use minimalism to free yourself of I don't know, those anchors that keep us kind of at bay.
Yeah, and that's it's a really vital component of that type of thinking, that philosophy, is that you can use it for whatever. It's not a matter where, you're a minimalist and now you have to live out of a bag.
Right.
That was my priority, was travel. And so literally anything that I owned above and beyond what I could fit into carry-on luggage was something that was weighing me down and keeping me from that thing that was most important. And you guys thankfully were able to come into it and say, well, actually, I have other things that are most important to me, and then use it to prioritize your things.
But I think that was the thing that was often a misconception about people who were, especially in that minimalist space, 2009 to 2010. Yeah. It was a bunch of single guys who were traveling a lot. But that's because the people who wrote about it were single guys who traveled a lot.
Who were also in the blogosphere. Like, it was an early era for the tech thing, too. Like, we didn't have a bunch of podcasts. We didn't have a lot of blogs, either. It was still a relatively new thing. And so the people who were already interested in that space, the people with the biggest megaphones, essentially, was a very narrow demographic who had very similar interests. And so it wasn't super representative.
And it opened us up to, like, when I started with you, I'm like, oh, that's cool, but I don't think it's for me. But then you led me to like Leo Babauta or Courtney Carver and like people who were actual normal people and not cyborgs. But we got some questions here today.
Well, before we dive, just real quick, it's funny. What I saw Colin do is he mentioned earlier how he wanted to travel. That was a priority. And I looked at my priorities and I'm like, okay, what do I want my number one priority to be? And at the time it was to reclaim some of my time. So minimalism helped me to basically just ask that question, like with what I was doing with all of my resources, my money, my time, my attention, like, are those serving this one purpose? For you it was traveling, for me it was getting my time back, and minimalism just helps you cut out the rest.
Yes, indeed.
All right, I'm ready to dive in.
Our first question today is from Corey. Corey is a Patreon subscriber from Arizona.
Thank you, Corey.
I know that part of the American dream is to own your own home. Do you still see owning a home as a worthy goal? I've paid off close to $100,000 in debt and am now debt-free, and it seems the next step after my emergency fund is to save up for a home. I feel that home prices are overvalued since most people go with a 30-year mortgage, and if 30-year mortgages were not an option, home prices would be way cheaper. I also don't enjoy my current work situation enough to be stuck with a mortgage. It gives me a feeling of claustrophobia, but I always hear that ong a home long-term is better than renting.
Ryan, I think depends what he means by long-term ultimately, right? On a long-term, you're going to be dead.
Right. On a long enough timeline, we're all dead.
Yeah.
So.
It's such a feel-good show.
Well, we like to uplift our listeners.
Yeah.
I think it really depends on what your objectives are. Like for Colin right now, it wouldn't make sense for you to own a home necessarily. Although it could. You could rent it out. I own a home back in Dayton, Ohio as a rental property, and I rent it out to someone, and that is truly an investment. I tend not to look at the home that you live in as an investment so much. Ultimately, it can become an asset for you, but I think we conflate the two. Investments are different from home ownership usually. In fact, home ownership is often not a blessing. It is a burden for you.
Right, it absolutely can be. And it can limit you, too, because then you have your resources tied up in this one asset, which is susceptible to damage, which is something that you have to take care of, that you have to continue to invest in. And it kind of depends, too, whether you want it as something that will grow in monetary value, or if you're looking at it as a practical asset that you're then able to utilize and get more out of your every moment of every day. Because if it amplifies the way that you're living your life and you're happier as a consequence, that potentially adds more value behind it. Then it makes a lot more sense because you're actually using it. Whereas if it's something that's monetary, then the digits in place and the amount that you're spending make a whole lot more. It feeds into the rationale behind it a whole lot more.
Yeah. Corey, first off, congratulations on paying off $100,000 of debt. That is freaking awesome. The one thing that Corey said that stood out to me was he talks about how it seems like this is the logical next step. I always hear people say that owning a home is better. So, we often talk about getting behind the why, like really understanding why we want to do anything in our lives, but especially when making major decisions like this. So, Corey, the question is why do you want to own a home? Is it because you feel like that is the logical next step? Is it because you hear people say that owning a home is better? Or is it because maybe he wants to, plant some roots and he wants to hang out for 5 to 10 years? I totally agree with his point of he is in this job that he doesn't love, that he kind of hates, and having a 30-year mortgage is going to make him feel claustrophobic. It should make him feel claustrophobic.
I don't think anyone should aspire to have a 30-year mortgage. We're one of two countries where that is the norm. And in fact, what Chris Hogan, when he was on our podcast, informed us, now they're starting to do 40-year mortgages with some banks. And at most, if you really wanted to buy a house, you should have at least 20% down. I think ideally 50% down. And you should try to do a 15-year mortgage and try to pay it off in 7 if you can.
Yeah.
Or you can save up enough money to eventually pay cash for a property, and then it does become an investment for you because you can rent it out, because if you don't actually own the home, then it's not home ownership. It's home borrowship until you actually own the property yourself. And so what I'm hearing here is it's sort of his discontent that is... in his question, there's a lot of discontent. I feel like I'm aspiring toward, as you said, Ryan, he's aspiring towards someone else's idea of the American dream or living the dream.
Yeah.
But he needs to identify what is his dream.
Yeah, buying a home for the sake of, well, I want to put money towards a mortgage rather than, throw money out the window with rent. That is not always the best advice.
Right. Well, just the opportunity cost in terms of money, but also in terms of then being stuck in a place. Even if you decide 5 years from now that you want to be somewhere else, the opportunity cost is literally everything else that you could be doing with that money, everything else that you could be doing with the time that you had to invest in that job that you don't particularly like to get that money, and then all of the other things that you could be doing elsewhere, but you have to stick around because you've got so much invested in this asset, in this one particular location.
Yeah. But
let's sum it up real quick. What would be positive about owning a house is, yes, you do end up owning an asset eventually. Usually not if you're on a 30-year mortgage, because you don't end up owning the home. You end up selling it beforehand.
It's a shame that that's the norm, man. Like, that is the 30-year mortgage. Like, that is the norm. I mean, I don't know what percentage of home loans are 30-year mortgages, but just because that's the norm or the average, like, that doesn't make it right. I mean,
it's just become common.
Yeah. And it's funny, like, we always talk about how, with this freedom we have in America comes a great responsibility. And, taking on a 30-year mortgage, that's a huge decision, huge responsibility.
Another positive is you have control over the space. So if you do want to remodel the kitchen or something, like the apartment I'm renting here in Los Angeles, I couldn't just, I'm going to remodel the kitchen. First off, it'd be a really bad idea for me to do that because I'd be spending my own money to improve someone else's asset.
Right.
So you would have more control of your space, which is great. On the downsides, I can think of a bunch of downsides. The cost is a downside because we think of like, oh yeah, it's a mortgage payment. It's roughly the same as my rent. Well, you also have to think about property taxes. And if it's a condo, there are all the HOA fees, which you have certainly experienced in the past. Also, things break. Water heaters break. Dishwashers break. Sometimes there's a crack in the wall or something happens in the foundation. Things go wrong with the house. And if you rent, then you make a phone call and say, hey, something went wrong with this property.
That's a great point. Like, Corey, think about what the advantages are to not owning a home. Yes, you can make a phone call and have a water heater replaced without forking out the money to do it yourself. Or you've got the freedom to pick up and move. I mean, that's... What does Derek Sivers say? Is he the one that talks about how he pays...
Renting is buying the option to move whenever you want. So basically, Corey, I think you have to figure out what is appropriate for you and for your lifestyle. What is your American dream? What does living the dream look like to you? And you know what I think will help you with that? I'm going to send you a copy of our book, Minimalism. It really outlines the 5 foundational values, because we all know this. If you don't know what your values are, then you're really not going to know the direction you want to go to pursue your dream. So, Podcast Sean, if you could reach out to Corey and send him a copy of Minimalism, the audiobook version. If you like our podcast, you'll like the audiobook version. Or if you want the book or the ebook, then we'll be happy to send those to you as well. But I think it's important to know what your values are so you can determine what is appropriate for your life.
Yeah, the problem is that if you don't know your values, then you start to look at other people and take on their values.
Right. And they may not be yours. And all of a sudden you've gone down the wrong path for 3 years, 5 years, and you're like, wait a minute. I'm living someone else's idea of a perfect life.
And the right investment for somebody can be the wrong investment for everybody else, essentially.
Yeah.
You could tweet that podcast, Sean. Ryan, what time is it?
You know what time it is? It is time for our lightning round where we answer questions from social media.
Indeed we do. We're at The Minimalist on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We have Colin here. He's at Colin is my name on all the relevant social media platforms. And during the lightning round, Colin, this is where we do our best to answer every question with just a short, shareable, less than 140 character response.
Didn't they double that? Did you guys not?
We didn't.
Minimalists.
We're real minimalists.
That's right.
But actually what we really do is we just maunder on a bit until we come up with something pithy. We call them minimal maxims, and Sean puts them in the show notes.
Take out all the thes and a's and ifs. Yeah.
Yeah, Sean makes it look really beautiful in post.
And then Social Jess, she puts it on minimalmaxims.com for us as well. So all of our pithy answers are collected in one place. What's our first question, Ryan?
Our first question is from Alan. What defines freedom these days? From a psychological, physical, financial, and material perspective, what are the key steps to take to begin to realize that sense of freedom while earning enough to provide for a family?
So what's freedom for you, Colin?
It's going to be different for every single person that you ask.
Totally agree.
For me, what's really important and what I try to invest in, and more so every year, I think, is making sure that I have the option to do the type of work that I care about, to be around the type of people that I want to surround myself with, to have the types of experiences that I want to have. And importantly, and this is something that won't be the same for everybody, but for me, I like being able to invest myself in projects that won't necessarily earn me money. And that's not something that you necessarily just get from society right off the bat. It's not something that you're told you're supposed to pursue, but I find that being able to invest myself fully as if it's a job that I'm doing full time to pay the rent, being able to invest myself in that way in stuff that may only pay off in terms of experience, in terms of me getting to see things from a slightly different angle, but won't necessarily pay off in terms of money. And having the option to do these things and to do all the natural extrapolations of that too, to do it from wherever I happen to want to go, being able to work with the type of people I want to work with, the freedom to kind of recalibrate things and put together different shapes of lifestyle whenever I want. That to me is freedom by my standard.
But also there's a certain discipline involved in that, because I think sometimes we think about freedom as like doing whatever you want whenever you want, but that's not real freedom. That is tyranny. When my 5-year-old daughter, if I let her do whatever she wants whenever she wants, she'd be dead in a week for sure.
You have to keep on building infrastructure. And for me, the way that I imagine it, just visually, is it's almost like a framework, like a scaffolding. And then within that scaffolding, I can build whatever I want at any point and take it apart and put it back together. But there's a skeleton on it. There's a structure there that keeps things, that provides me with a foundation in 3 dimensions that allows me to build whatever I want. So it's kind of the equivalent of preparing yourself for whatever you might want to do in the future, rather than preparing yourself for one specific future. That's the way I tend to think about it.
There's something there with freedom and discipline, because like you said, like we feel like freedom is doing whatever we want, but that leads to chaos.
Yeah.
So having to discipline or have discipline, have self-discipline, or to have to force ourselves to do things doesn't really feel like freedom.
But that's what. Jocko Willink has a book.
So interesting.
Discipline equals freedom, right?
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what he's saying there. Is you have to have that scaffolding. You have to have these sort of structures in place so that you can do what you want, but within the confines of it. It's not always. Your life is not a comfortable life.
There's
Colin.
a lot of discomforts, but those discomforts, I perceive them as valuable frictions.
Right.
Not everybody would, but I think part of it too, part of being able to have that discipline over time is recognizing, one, the difficult things that are not enjoyable are valuable, and as a consequence, you can take a certain type of pleasure in that, in accomplishing those things. But also being able to kind of recalibrate your perception of even those frictions and discomforts and saying, this is enjoyable in a way. How novel and unique this uncomfortable experience happens to be. Yeah. That stoic mentality that you can't control what happens around you, but you can control your perception of it, how you respond to it. Yeah. There's a lot of that goes into this, I think.
I'm going to give a pithy answer here. Our freedom corresponds directly with our ability to walk away from anything.
Preach.
That's one thing I really learned from you, Colin, was your ability to walk away even from situations that are going relatively well, or what people would perceive to be going well. Like when I was in the corporate roles when I first discovered you, and we've become really good friends since then. But what I realized back then is like, oh, like Colin's walking away from stuff that he doesn't hate necessarily. He doesn't wait till something blows up to walk away from it. He's walking towards something else. And during our Patreon episode today, I'm actually going to read from this essay that I wrote a while ago called "The Things We're Prepared to Walk Away From." And I think often it's perceived to be cold at first.
Right.
Yeah. When you've walked away from things in the past, it's actually because you're walking towards something that is increasing your freedom.
Yeah. I've actually had a lot of people look at what I have done over the years and say, so what are you running from? Like the FBI. They haven't caught me yet.
What are you talking about?
But no, I mean, that's the thing, though. Like, it can look like running away because that's our perception, that if you are trying to change dramatically, if you're recalibrating your compass in some dramatic way, well, that probably means that something went totally awry, something blew up behind you and you're trying to escape. When in reality, ideally, we're always kind of looking toward other possibilities and other options, and we're always looking for opportunities to make valuable pivots, whether they're small or very large, and then preparing ourselves over time so that when we want to make those pivots, we are in the right position, psychologically, financially, everything else, so that we can do it without it being this crazy risk that might destroy everything and hurt people. Instead, it's something that's just kind of a crazy personal risk and a little bit of it's devastating to the status quo and your expectations and habits, but otherwise it's something that doesn't cause any harm.
It's not devastating to you individually. The thing with the corporate world for me is when I walked away, you really helped me realize, like, oh, it's going to be okay. Like, I didn't think I was ever going to do this whole minimalism thing and everything else was going to be all this, but I realized, like, no, I could just write fiction and make $23,000 a year working at a coffee shop.
I was going to say, I
I'm
remember
going
you
to be
saying
okay.
you were going to be a barista or something.
Yeah,
that went sideways.
That was my main objective was to do that. And so when
we
I
got sidetracked.
Yeah,
You totally screwed up your coffee career. Yeah.
Well, I didn't hate my corporate career either. Like, it was a 6 out of 10 for me, and I was really good at it. And that was actually the problem. It was so hard to walk away from something you're good at and you don't hate. But I also wasn't passionate about it. It wasn't my dream anymore.
Yeah. My pithy answer, it's funny, when Josh and I prepare for this, so we have the Twitter question, and then we just put down our pithy answers. And I don't look at your answers because I don't want it to influence my answer, but I literally wrote something basically along the same lines of, like, freedom is the ability to walk away from anything. So here's my second pithy answer, really. Debt-free is the new American dream. And what I mean by that, Alan, is debt is one of the biggest chains that we chain ourselves with. So if you are currently not debt-free, I would encourage you to, like, take that as the first step to becoming free.
One of the better decisions I made before I left LA.
Yeah.
It untethers you in a lot of ways, psychologically and otherwise.
Right, because you don't have to force yourself to go to that job you hate. You don't have to. Yeah. It takes a lot of hard work to get there. I don't want to undermine how difficult it is to become debt-free, but it's totally possible.
But it's an achievable dream. But
Absolutely.
It requires that discipline and hard work for sure. All right, looks like we got one more question for the lightning round.
We do. It is from Aaron. Do you feel like you've met more meaningful people by traveling? If so, how has it affected you compared to before you were traveling?
Well, my quick pithy answer to this one is our perspectives shape our worldview shapes our lives. And that's the one thing when we're talking to, like, big crowds of people when we go on tour, there's a joke I often say is, like, there are 3 things I hate: travel, crowds of people, and public speaking. But it's not that I actually hate those things. It's putting myself in an uncomfortable situation that isn't actually going to be devastating to me, but that's the place from which I grow the most.
Yeah.
And I think traveling has enabled you to grow in ways that you probably didn't anticipate when you first set out to do it.
Full of valuable frictions, like just things that test you and push you right beyond what you're comfortable with. Like, that's what I tend to look for. It's like going to the gym. You don't want to, like, completely destroy yourself to the point where you injure yourself, but you also don't want to do something so easy and familiar that you don't have any gains from it. You want to do something just beyond what you were capable of and comfortable with before. And that includes meeting people. Like, I don't think that you must travel to meet interesting people and have valuable relationships. But you can't really help but meet a bunch of people who will challenge your sense of the way that the world works when you travel. So it makes it a little bit easier, but you can actually do the same thing. This is something that I wanted to test when I lived in Wichita and Memphis, came back to the U.S. to explore some place that was more familiar with more familiar tropes and culture. I wanted to make sure I could do some of the same stuff without traveling rapidly. And anywhere you go, you can do this. It just requires that you put in a little bit more effort if a lot of the structure is already familiar.
Yeah.
Ryan, finish us off with something pithy.
It looks like you have an edited, and I don't have the edited version. Can I read your edited version of my pithy answer?
Sure.
Thanks, man.
Cribbing his notes.
All right, my pithy answer is, to live life to the fullest, we must seek different perspectives, no matter how uncomfortable they make us. And, to your point, Colin, like, you have to go out and you have to have your beliefs and your values challenged a little bit. Like, I grew up in this bubble of, being part of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and anyone who challenged anything, I had these walls built up that really prevented me from being happy, honestly.
Yeah.
And it is truly a pleasure to be able to travel around and get all different types of perspectives. But yeah, you've got to have a diverse group of people to bounce those values and beliefs off of.
Yeah, but I don't remember who said it, but strong beliefs lightly held, I think, is a really good policy, because then being open to changing your mind is one of the most intellectually honest things any person can do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're meeting with our friend TK Coleman after this. You and I were talking about this yesterday. He steel mans instead of straw manning an argument. He steel mans both sides of an argument, because he knows. In fact, he'll argue with you even if he has the same belief as you. He'll argue against your belief in order to make his own a bit stronger. And I'm getting a wrap-up sign from Sean. So it looks like we have several more surprise questions to talk about today. I want to talk about, I want to answer some questions here about whether minimalism actually works for poor people. That's a question we have. We also have questions about new products that help fulfill the American dream, about whether the American dream is still relevant, and I want to chat with Colin about his curiosity for everything. He seems to be one of the most curious people I know. Also, I have a bit of a health update for you all as well. I found out I got a really bad E. coli overgrowth when we were in Brazil last September, and that's really what has led to the last 6-month spiral.
I saw you eating bunches of romaine lettuce a couple weeks ago.
That was definitely not it. I drank some water down in Brazil, and I just got some tests back. So we'll talk about that as well on the Maximal episode. Also, Ryan and I had the strangest but oddly fun DMV experience yesterday.
Yeah.
And we can at least talk about that. Talk about turning a bad situation into something where hilarity ensued, where I think we almost got kicked out of the DMV. And if you all want to hear all of that, you can listen to this week's Maximal episode, available exclusively on Patreon. That's right, you are currently listening to our weekly Minimal episode, but each week Ryan and I record an entirely different long-form Maximal episode on the Minimalist's private podcast, which gives us the private space we need to discuss topics we don't usually discuss in public. Plus, we don't wear pants on that episode.
Pants optional.
I mean, we only videotape ourselves from the waist up, so
yeah, it's mainly for us.
Yeah.
Plus, Patreon is the best way for us to fund this podcast and keep it 100% advertisement free. When you subscribe to the Minimalist private podcast on Patreon, you'll receive a personal link so that our Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You also get access to our entire back catalog of more than 100 private podcast episodes. Find all the details and all the good stuff, including an additional long-form podcast episode every week over at theminimalists.com/support. Ryan, what else you got for us this week?
being informed is more important than ever. So I want to encourage everyone to read more and get informed. And now here are some voicemail comments and tips from our listeners.
Hello, this is Lari from Brazil, and I would like to share my experience with leaving Facebook. I once had 5,000 Facebook friends because I believed this would bring me more business. It did not. These people were collecting me, like one more pin for the Pinterest board of friends, as was I. So I started to unfriend them one by one, and once I got to only people I actually knew, I still had over 400 friends. There's no way that keeping in touch with 400 people would add value to my life. So I decided to ignore the potential backlash and unfriend until I was down to close friends only. And guess what? There was zero backlash, because these people did not actually care about me as much as I did not actually care about them. The next step seemed so obvious to me. All my close friends have my number, so why not limit these interactions to actual conversations and delete Facebook altogether? It's been over a year and I never looked back.
Hey guys, so I have been trying to live a more sustainable and ethical life, and that is how I came across your podcast. On many episodes, and especially the one about clothing, you guys discussed buying things responsibly and suggested a few companies that share your values. I wanted to share how this can be applied not just to things, but also with everyday consumable items that obviously you cannot buy secondhand, such as cleaning supplies, beauty, bath and body items, skincare, and many other. Many of the standard companies that you find in stores don't have the most sustainable or ethical practices. Most cleaning or beauty brands use dirty palm oil, others use harsh chemicals, and many other things. So this has led me to discover and support smaller businesses. So for example, I buy natural deodorant, lotions, and all my bath items from an Etsy shop. There are many out there. I just picked the one closest to me, and it's all natural and homemade. I buy my dishwashing and laundry detergent from Drops. That's spelled DROPPS. It gets shipped to my house, and you can look on their website about their awesome social and environmental responsibility. It is also plastic free. It's just little pods that come in a box. My favorite brand is my toilet paper and paper towel brand. They're called Who Gives a Crap. It is a bit more pricey, but they donate 50% of their profits to building toilets in the third world countries, where lack of sewage systems affects health and many children die from this. So it is a great way to help by doing something as simple as, well, wiping your butt. Plus, their emails are always funny with the toilet puns, and they make reports showing their latest donations and impacts. Those are just a few of my favorite alternatives. There are many more out there if you do your research. So if you can, don't just focus responsible purchasing to clothes and things, but also to everyday things.
All right, y'all. Thanks again to Colin Wright for joining us today. Make sure you check out his podcast. It's called Let's Know Things, and find him on the web, exilelifestyle.com. You can read any of his 34 books, 35?
Somewhere in the neighborhood.
Okay.
Yeah, he lost count.
I think he writes a book for every year he's been alive. He's been writing one book a year since he was 0.
Oh, my God.
The early ones are pretty rough. Not my best work.
Yeah, check him out, exilelifestyle.com. And real quick, for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalists. Well, sort of. It's one person we work with, Jessica Lynn Williams. Some of you know her as Social Jess. She started her own social media business. She's helping folks be more intentional with their social media, especially businesses or brands who want to communicate more effectively, aren't worried about, I need to gain 700,000 followers, but how do I effectively communicate with people in a way that adds value to their lives?
Quality over quantity.
She's really good.
Yeah, and she's really helped us add value using our own creations and our own words and photos, but curating in a way. She's really a curator of social media for us.
She'll tweet out something, and it's like, at Ryan Nicodemus, and I'm like, I don't even remember saying that.
I am so profound.
I'm like, man, this is good.
So if you're interested in getting some help with your social media, or you know someone who is, her website is intentional.social is the name of her website. And if you have a question, comment, or minimalism tip for our podcast, leave us a voicemail, 406-219-7839, or send a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. You can comment on this episode at youtube.com/theminimalists. If you want our show notes in your inbox, you can sign up for our email list over at theminimalists.com, which will also sign you up for our Simple Sunday emails each week. And of course, we'll never send you spam because that stuff's gross. For our added value this week, David Gray is back.
I didn't even know this.
Yeah, his new album just came out. It's his first album in 5 years. It's called Gold in a Brass Age. I think the album is really it's like this portrait of ethereal maturity. He's become this mature singer-songwriter who has grown with age, and the album itself it's more sort of laid back than his previous album that I know you really enjoyed.
Yeah.
So let's play you out today with the lead-off track from Gold in a Brass Age. It's called The Sapling. And if you leave here today with just one message, we hope it's this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
The Minimalists.